Welcome to Someone Talks, the official podcast of the National D-Day Memorial, where leading experts spill all the secrets of the Second World War. With your host, Dr. John C. McManus.
Greetings. Welcome to Someone Talked. I'm your host, Dr. John C. McManus from Missouri S&T, and alongside, as always, are my dear buddies from the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, April Cheek Messier and John Long. How you doing today, folks?
Oh, this is going to be an exciting discussion today.
I don't know, but they're there's a chance of some rain moving in later. Do we want to postpone 24 hours or?
The weather doesn't matter for anything. It has no bearing on D-Day, right?
Or any battle for that matter,
God.
Right. So, as everybody knows, John and April and I, and of course many others, are pretty much obsessed with all things D-Day. And happily enough, there's a brand new movie coming out called Pressure, which of course pertains to D-Day, and as we've alluded to, especially the weather and how that affected the decision making. So we thought we'd run a quick trailer for you. Woody, if you can cue that up. We want to just sort of set the discussion up this way, to just have a quick trailer, maybe give you the feel and flavor of the film a little bit.
Call General Eisenhower.
Tiger was a training op, dress rehearsal for D-Day. They walked right into it. One mistake. Just that one mistake.
Ike, you have to stop doing this to yourself. What's done is done. Group Captain Dr. James Stagg, here at the express request of General Eisenhower.
Do we have a date yet for the invasion's out?
D-Day is in 61 hours from now. This is the largest seaborne invasion in history. Fate of the war, thousands of lives hinge on this. I need a forecast. Churchill tells me you're the best meteorologist in the country.
Get me the latest readings from every single base within 2,000 miles of Normandy. The invasion is confirmed for Monday.
Oh, they won't like this.
We are faced with a succession of two aggressive storms.
Are you absolutely certain?
D-Day will be calm and sunny.
I couldn't disagree with that more.
If D-Day is cancelled, we will lose this war.
The final decision on the timing of D-Day will be mine, and mine alone.
If you invade tomorrow, they're going to be washed away.
300,000 men with families that they may never see again. Why should I trust you?
We must face the facts! The facts, however frightening they may be!
If we delay,
the enemy will be ready and waiting. They'll slaughter every single last one of us.
The storms that I'm talking about are real, and the wrath of nature is real.
So we have a special treat in the wake of that trailer. The director of the movie Pressure, Anthony Morris, has been kind enough to join us. Anthony, thanks so much. Great to have you today.
Thank you, John. Pleasure to be here.
It's absolutely. So maybe let's just start our discussion. If you could tell us how you came to this project. I mean, how does that all come together for you?
It was simple as having read a play which had just been turned into a screenplay by David Haig, and the play was Pressure, and it had been successful on the West End in London. I hadn't particularly been looking, to be honest, to do a military story or war story, anything like that. But I guess more than anything, what really captivated me from the first read, I couldn't put it down when I started reading it, but what really captivated me was this idea of this whole film, when you strip everything back, kind of being about this one binary decision. Do we launch the biggest invasion in history on Monday, or don't we? And, what followed from that question was 3 days that the sort of film goes through, where all these really smart, really exceptional, the best men and women that the Allied effort had to offer were just smashing up one against one another with not knowing what to do. And I thought it was a really interesting crucible for a film about leadership, for a film about decision making, and for a film more than anything when you don't have all the answers. How do you bring your best self to the table to make this decision? Now, in this case, it applied to one of the most consequential, decisions in history. It's, whether to launch this ginormous invasion or not. But, I think there's something in it which applies to everyone, where when we got a tough road ahead and you don't know which way to decide, what do you do? And that's the question that got its hook into me from when I first read the script. And there are many things beyond that which found it compelling. But I think if it was the one thing, it was that, like, how do you bring your best self to the table when the chips are down? So, that was it.
And it's done in such a fabulous way. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that, but just to back up a little bit, Anthony, if you could talk about, so the movie itself is based on a British play by David Haig, who a lot of our listeners may remember him. And it's hard to believe this has been over 30 years ago, but 4 Weddings and a Funeral, he was in there. Yeah. He's done a tremendous actor. But I found it so interesting. He had invested a great deal of time researching and writing this play. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how you all came together, and what does it take to move a stage production to cinema?
Well, David had done a hell of a lot of work. He also played James Stagg, who's the protagonist, in over 300 performances. So to say he knew the material well is an understatement. But the project went through a whole new evolution once we joined forces. He had done a lot of research, primarily from Stagg's biography and other sort of research materials, notes that were taken at the time from sort of different participants in the events. And it was very much centered, within the halls of power. When I came on board, we spent many years after that, to be honest, kind of stripping the kind of play back to its constituent parts and then reforming it for cinema. So practically what that meant was, how do we really center the narrative on this head-to-head tussle, on the one hand between the one set of meteorologists who were saying everything's going to be fine, invade, go, and another camp who were like, are you crazy? There is this ginormous storm coming. Can't you see it? And then you got Eisenhower in the middle of it, who obviously is not a meteorologist, but has to decide, as he has to decide on many things. You and your audience will probably know, better than most. But, they were sending midget submarines out to the coast of Normandy to get little thimbles full of sand to see what tracks to put on their tires. They were doing all sorts of deception measures. It was like a big Jenga stack, and any little piece that you pull out, the whole thing could topple down. Now, Eisenhower had obviously this responsibility to make sure this massive thing went right. On Stagg's shoulders rested, how do I give certainty kind of when there is none? And we did a really deep dive, on military records, on biographies, on personal testimonies. We went back through all sorts of archives. And at a certain point as a dramatist, you've got to do that research. You've got to understand what happened. And then you've got to kind of look for the deeper truth, like what the characters were going through, in which case you don't have a minute-to-minute playbook of what everyone was thinking. And our job is to kind of infer that and look at where are the weak points, where are the stress points that, beyond the public kind of image of, strength and everyone's together and we're making these decisions and everything's calm. No, it was a bloody hothouse because hundreds of thousands of men were on the line. And it's interesting with Eisenhower in particular. We know him as a president who was very calm, was very composed. He was a master diplomat. That's one of the reasons why he got the role in the first place. But he was smoking 4 to 6 packs a day of cigarettes in the lead up to this. He was drinking a little bit of whiskey at night. He temper gets the better of you, and we wanted to sort of show all of that, not just the image that is often shown. Like, we want to show what was it like for a general at war and his main people at war. So that was some of the impulses behind what we were doing.
Well, let's talk some more about James Stagg. He's a name that a lot of our listeners will recognize. Some may not. Certainly, some of the audience that will watch the movie won't know much about him. So, tell us, who was James Stagg? Why did you find him such a compelling character to explore? And also, tell us a little bit about how the actor chose to portray him.
Well, I think the first thing that grabbed me about Stagg was he was like a completely no BS kind of guy. He was going to give you his opinion whether you kind of liked it or not. And I just found something refreshing in hearing someone get up and sort of basically, tell it like it is, as they say. He was extremely data driven. He was extremely forward thinking in his approach to, what he did for his work. He was kind of in touch with nature in a way that we might not imagine scientists to be. So he didn't formally train as a meteorologist. Meteorology was a really new field when he was coming into the fore. But he ended up becoming a really accomplished meteorologist. He had spent time in the Arctic Circle on like boats and freezing waters. Like, he was a pretty tough dude. And by the time World War II came around, in the I think it was in about November 1943 or thereabouts, he was inducted into the Royal Air Force. He was a civilian. He wasn't a soldier. Get pulled in to give weather reports. And I'd read somewhere that one of the people that wanted to get him in was stressing the importance of the weather. And they'd brought up Waterloo, and they'd said, if Napoleon had taken a little bit more care with the weather at Waterloo, maybe it would have been a different outcome. And that's something that always stuck with me. Sometimes you can have these characters who are kind of forgotten to history in many ways, but without whose contribution life as we know it would be very different. When Eisenhower, many years after the war, was finishing his time as president, he had to do the handover to JFK. And JFK, who was a soldier in World War II, one of the first questions he asked him on Inauguration Day was, like, what was it that gave you the edge on D-Day? And in his typical kind of candid way, I just sort of looked at him and said, well, we had better meteorologists than the Germans. And that kind of really interested me. I was like, wow, it's this massive moment. Who is this guy, and what was he about? And so the real-life Stagg was a plumber's son. He didn't come from any kind of nobility. He just sort of, he was son of regular people. He was a regular guy in many respects in terms of, people didn't know him, but he came and he kind of built himself into history in these sort of months and days leading up to D-Day. And I think it was really important to try and capture that, and to capture a character who, who had this internal strength that is kind of hard to put words around. Try and imagine where you've got, this massive military machine needing to invade a continent, or else maybe, Europe is overrun by Nazis or Soviets, in the months and years to come. And everyone's ready to go, and everyone wants to go, and they really want this thing to succeed. And you're the one person that has kind of maybe peeked into the future a little bit, and you've looked over the hill. Everyone's still down further on the slope behind you, and you can see what's coming. No one believes you. And you have to tell them something they really don't want to hear, that all the stuff that you've worked for, is just going to get washed away because nature doesn't give a shit about your feelings. And, I thought that was a very interesting, compelling story to kind of dig deeper into.
Yeah, and Stagg has played brilliantly by Andrew Scott. I mean, of course, is an amazing actor, and we definitely see him explore a lot of the different emotions of Stagg, who, of course, on the personal side, he has a heavily pregnant wife.
Mm-hmm.
And, she may have been, under the weight of a bombing raid too. So there's that element of it too, which is spot on. That was something he was dealing with. And so I like the focus on Stagg because he becomes, in some respects, one of the most important people on the planet during those few days. And like Ike's comment to Kennedy is spot on. I mean, they had better meteorologists, but they also had better weather stations too. And the movie portrays that, like putting up the weather balloons, which was, pretty cutting edge for that time frame. You got them all over the Atlantic. And this is certainly part of the victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. The Allies have better weather access, access to weather data than do the Germans. And, certainly that comes into play. So Stagg embodies that. And so here he is played by Andrew Scott on dealing with all those levels. And there's an antagonist who emerges because, all the meteorologists did not necessarily agree on what was coming. It wasn't as kind of cut and dried as it is now when we have satellites and radar, this kind of thing. So you portray that in the movie. Scott's Stagg conflicts with Chris Messina's Lieutenant Colonel Irving Crick. So who is Crick, and why does he clash with Stagg so dramatically?
Irving Crick was, as funny as it is to say, was probably as close to a movie star meteorologist as you could get. Back then, he was a smooth-talking, really exceptionally bright, extremely accomplished meteorologist. But his specialty, had been predicting weather for movie shoots in Los Angeles. I can tell you, it's generally going to be okay, the weather in Los Angeles. He got involved in the war effort. He was with Eisenhower all through North Africa. And for that kind of weather system, his predictions were spot on. And so Eisenhower knew him, he trusted him, and he hadn't really got it wrong before. And it was a completely new field of play, when they were looking to cross the channel and head into France, because of course, famously, the English weather is a lot more fickle with all of that weather coming off the Atlantic, and it was just completely unpredictable. And in a way, yes, Crick is an antagonist in that he has an opposing viewpoint. But I kind of feel that, from great arguments, great truths emerge. And I think maybe Crick's presence there and having the alternating point of view there was needed, because you've got to test your theories, right? And so I think that clash between the meteorologists, as impossible as it would have been for the person who actually had to decide, you do want to hear both sides out. Back then, it wasn't settled science. And the real antagonist, in a way, is nature. I used to surf when I was younger in Australia, and without getting to kind of Point Break on it all, if you've ever seen that movie, when the big waves are coming behind you, and I didn't ride waves that were that big, but when they're coming behind you, you either have got to basically try and go with it and ride with the wave, or it's going to crush you. And in a big way, the weather was like that. If they didn't respect nature, it is the strongest force that there is. It's just invisible to us. We're not used to really sort of acknowledging it because it happens, far away. We only see the outcome of it. It's a little bit removed from our lives, but it governs everything. There's actually a line in the film where they sort of talk about, the weather feeds us, it clothes us, it sort of supports all life on this earth. And if you don't have the wisdom to respect it, you'll get crushed by it. And it's happened many times in military history before D-Day and probably after D-Day. It's just, this was one event where it was like, wow, it was right, at the center. And it was, a matter of days and hours. And yeah.
Crick was an interesting character, and to the day he died, he insisted he was the one that told Ike it's time to invade. But John, let me ask you a question. Do you know of another battle that was really defeated by weather in the way Normandy could have? I think we can all talk about a dozen battles that were hampered by weather, but do you know of one that was really just,
I mean, let's have a bigger scope. It's the campaign in Russia in 1941, when, the weather, you talk about bad weather. I mean, when the Russian winter blows in, as of about late October and into November, now you're into a terrible situation, and it only gets worse in December. And so that that conversation that Anthony alluded to between Kay Summersby and Stagg, and it's kind of funny. And I have a feeling that when meteorologists see this film, many of them will chuckle to themselves, because the point Summersby's making is that meteorologists are boring people, and they're the nerds in the room. Kind of is the implication, I guess. That's what I took from it. And then Stagg says, okay, maybe we are, but the weather isn't. And like you just said, Anthony, it's the weather feeds us. The weather decides on our fate somehow. I mean, so I really like that exchange, because you see what has brought Stagg to this table. Why he searches this, constantly looking for an edge in predicting the weather, because he understands the larger importance of it. And of course, he would have seen what happened to the Germans in the Soviet Union in relation to the winter. And of course, everybody would have been reared on tales of the Spanish Armada too, which obviously had been famously foiled by weather, right? So, I mean, let's explore that conversation a little bit more. I mean, as you set up that scene, what were you telling the actors in terms of how to portray that kind of exchange
between Kay and Stagg?
Yeah.
That was an important scene in the film for a bigger reason, because kind of up until that moment, Stagg has got all this pressure on him, and as a way to deal with that, he's got this kind of gruff, rough kind of exterior. Without giving away too much, the scene that we're talking about comes after this really explosive moment between Ike and Stagg, and it's the first time a little humanity can kind of eke out of both Stagg and Kay, because for just a fleeting moment, they've gone through this kind of wood chipper that was Ike's wrath in the lead up to it. It's just a little moment where they could relate as humans. And, Kay's little comment about Weatherman being boring, was able to sort of elicit something in Stagg where it was like, well, look, this is how I see life. And Andrew Scott said something really interesting when he was preparing for that role. He's like, in England, a lot of people talk about good weather and bad weather. And particularly foreigners who come into England talk about England's bad weather. And he goes, but I don't look at it like that. He's like, it's kind of like a metaphor for life. We have sunny days, we have cloudy days, we have, rainy days, and we have hot days. And it's all kind of the soup of life. And you need the highs and you need the lows. And I think what he was trying to get at, in his delivery of those lines, and certainly in the writing of them, is, we are, it's obvious and stupid to say it, but we are products of nature. And there's something going on with Stagg that's deeper than just taking the numbers down to get the meteorological forecasts. In that scene, you try and get a sense that beyond everything, this is a guy who has spent his life trying to decode nature, to try and look into the hidden architecture behind typhoons and hurricanes and hot weather systems and all this stuff, and kind of, seeing in the matrix code of it kind of thing. And I don't know, I'm not going to say it's the opposite of spiritual. It's, we don't know all the answers, but from these little facts, what can we see of Oz behind the curtain kind of thing. And I don't know if I'm getting too meta into it, but that's kind of, it's about life as much as it is about the weather at that moment. So, yeah.
And Anthony, let's talk about Eisenhower a little bit more. Of course, he's the other main role. And what interests you? I mean, I guess the question is, first of all, Brendan Fraser does a wonderful job. So how did you decide who should play such an important role? And how do you think Brendan Fraser captures this incredible stress in this decision making that he's doing at that time?
Well, it's funny because with Eisenhower, again, we kind of see him as one kind of figure. Obviously, being in charge of the Allied effort after World War II, he has become an icon. He's become a hero. But there's a human being behind that icon. And, we're trying to look at how that icon was made. And what really struck me, as I alluded to a little bit earlier in our interview, was he was a guy that was under absolute extreme stress, who was smoking multiple packets of cigarettes a day, who was, his knee was bunk and he was coughing and his back killed him. And he was, World War II almost broke the guy. He had kind of ill health later in life, I think, because of what he went through in World War II. And, then from his diaries and from diaries of Kay Summersby, who was his driver and confidant in many ways, you also get this picture of a leader who's got to put up this strong facade in front of everyone because he's got to lead them and they can smell fear and you need to motivate them and all that sort of stuff. But in his private moments, he's doubting himself as anyone would. He's not a psychopath. You really get a sense of a general who cared for his men. And again, your history-minded viewers will know this, that he'd written 2 letters on the eve of D-Day, a letter in success and a letter in failure. And in success, he gave the credit to his soldiers. In failure, he took the responsibility on his own back, and he had them both prepared and drafted and ready to go. And I thought, wow, that's a kind of leader that we're not really used to seeing these days. Like for many years now, it's, claim the glory and sort of deny the responsibility. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. Like it's a different kind of president. It's a different kind of leader. And where Brendan became really interesting is that, he's a towering dude, but there's a vulnerability in him. And I thought it's maybe more honest to start from a place of vulnerability and then try and build the strength on top of that he's got to show to the world and then kind of go the other way around. So I was kind of looking for an actor, who was intensely human, and it's the most opposite role in the world, but I'd seen him in The Whale and, he was a vulnerable, massive fat man in that. I thought, well, can we shrink him down a bit? And we're not trying to go for imitation. Like the way he comes across, he wasn't trying the same accent or anything like that. It was really about, how do we get into the soul of a leader who desperately cares for his men and doesn't know which way to choose? And that was the starting point. And then I saw a photograph of Brendan and a photograph of Eisenhower. I kind of looked at them together, and even though you wouldn't bloody think it, you can look up. There's some of them have come online. And I was like, shit, they do kind of look like one another. Maybe we can follow this. And the rest is history. We asked him to do it, and he was more than happy. And that's how we got to where we are.
Well, it's wrapped up in the title, pressure, which has a lot of different dimensions to it. Barometric pressure in terms of the weather, but the ultimate pressure, and of course, is the pressure Stagg is under as the expert, trying to give the best information possible, and of course, being the unpopular person in the room, telling people what they don't want to hear. The film explores that, but also the pressure on Eisenhower, which, if we step back and think about that, you could argue there'd been no human being under that kind of pressure in human history. There's so much riding on this, and if it fails because of the weather of all things, much less the Germans, what a catastrophe that's going to be. And so, so Fraser's performance kind of does convey that, I think, like that constant, it's almost as if, when he strides into the room, you can see the weight on his shoulders. He's slumping under that. Was that intentional, or was that just something that?
Look, that particular thing, I didn't say to Brendan to do that, but we spent a lot of time talking about exactly that weight of the world on your shoulders and how does that manifest. A lot of people I've seen online a little bit are like, but you don't realize by 1944 the war was won. The Soviets, were going to take, Germany, and wouldn't have had a problem. And that was exactly the point. The Soviet, had D-Day not succeeded, continental Europe very much could have been a Soviet playground for the next 70 years. And, if you go deeper into the history, there were already proxy wars going on by that time between Soviet Union and the Allied and the West and US and Britain and stuff. Even in occupied countries like in Greece, where my family are from, there was vicious fighting between Elas and Eves, which are the, two various left and right factions, that on one hand were being financed and, the military guns and stuff funded by the Soviets, on the other hand by the Allies. There was already a tussle for what would become of Europe following the war. So whilst yes, the Allies, were, it was America and Britain and Soviet Union together. They were looking to carve up, their spheres of influence afterwards, and D-Day was central to that. If they didn't get on the continent, it could have been a Soviet Europe. There might have been I'm sure John can speak more to this, but there could have been a treaty, and the Nazis might have kept west of the Rhineland. There's all this sort of unknown stuff, which now you look back and you say, yeah, duh, we won World War II. You got to remember that it's history now, but at the time, no one knew what the hell was going to happen. And they had to walk into those rooms, every hour of every day, with the expectation that this all could come crashing down at any moment. And yes, that was focused on Eisenhower, largest military force in history up until that point, maybe even since that point, and he was at the apex of it, and he had to make these calls. It came down to what a weatherman said. So there you go.
And plus, it's an election year in the United States in 1944, and that
wow.
matters. And they weren't thinking about this at the time, but the Holocaust would have been way worse if the invasion fails, and much less the time the Germans would have had to develop more weaponry. And I mean, it's just, when you start thinking about it, it almost gives you the shakes. I mean, it's it's really daunting.
And by the way, I was going to say, I have to give a shout out to whoever did all your set and the detail, because I love seeing, it was amazing. And also Eisenhower circus wagon. We're a huge fan here of his circus wagon, the van, obviously where he received information on D-Day. And it was just so great to see that in the film. So loved that.
We've been in it. Yeah.
We've been in it.
It's actually, the real one?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
2 hours from where we're sitting right now.
That's right.
I would love to visit that. Wait, so is you're in Missouri now, are you?
We're in Virginia.
We're in Virginia.
Yeah. Virginia, yeah.
That's right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's at Camp Lee, Army base near Richmond. Well, hard to get to nowadays because security has tightened up quite a bit. But
I can imagine.
Let me ask you about Kay Summersby, who very, very well portrayed by Kerry Condon. And there was a lot of gossip during the war about the relationship she had with Ike. There's been a lot of speculation since then, and I really appreciate the way you portray it, staying away from scandal and things that are the rumors in a lot of cases. But how did you choose to represent this relationship between the two of them, and how important was she to Eisenhower?
Well, they were extremely close. There's she's mentioned, in many of the minutes meetings, you see at the signing of many documents with world leaders and others, you got this presence of Kay Summersby in the background. Now, she obviously came on as his driver. She was not she was no shrinking violet. She'd been married to a guy who had been killed in the war, and she just didn't want to sit there as a little widow. She was driving ambulances. This is mentioned in the screenplay, in the movie. She was driving ambulances during the Blitz, and in her biography, she talks about having a morgue. The morgues were full, and they had nowhere to deliver the bodies. They had to take them to a cinema, and in the front row, she has this image that I never got out of my head of World War II. Kay Summersby said, was this row of headless corpses sitting at the front seat of the cinema, and she had come from that. So, in our film, it's not a story about Kay particularly. It's not a story about Kay and Ike's relationship specifically, but we tried to imbue that history in terms of her personal history and how she conducts herself. It was definitely a man's world, in the halls of power in Suffolk House in World War II. But this driver became a close confidant of the, who would become the president of the Allied leader back then. And there's a lot of talk about what their relationship was. That talk extends right the way up to Truman, and everyone had an opinion on it. Our film's not about that, though. If we were to do a film about Kay and Ike, I would go headlong into whatever their history was, and you try and find the truth. That's not what this film was. This film was about how do we, I said it earlier, how do we launch the biggest invasion of all time, and are all these men going to die, and what do we do to stop it? And I think all these characters, Kay and Ike and Stagg and Craig, they're all focused on that. But there's another subtextual layer. It's like, yes, you do get this sense between Kay and Ike that she's someone who's really special to him and her opinion matters. And I think what is beyond doubt is that in Kay Summersby, Eisenhower had someone he thought that he could trust, insofar as just be real around when the public wasn't there. And I think, it might be hard to imagine, but, if you're out sleeping in a tent or sleeping in a caravan for years on end and you got all this stress, who is it that you can speak to? He had a butler or an aide, I guess you could say. John might be able to help me on the name. Henry, anyway, I forget his name right now, but he was very close with. Eisenhower had various people in his circle, but Kay was definitely one of them. And we wanted this relationship to be one of support, one where they were able to express their honest feelings about one another. And Kay was not a career military person. She wasn't trying to climb the ladder. He didn't have to worry about her, trying to get a post and, as this position or that. He could just express how he felt to her. And I think the record shows that in that time, they were very close, in their willingness, to do that. So that's kind of what the film explores in regards to their relationship.
Anthony, I'm always interested in how filming takes place, and because I would imagine you had your own bit of pressure in making this film, and you also had your own meteorological challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your own conundrum when you were trying to film different pieces of this film?
I certainly can. We ended up shooting the film in England, which is where I wanted to shoot it. We ended up shooting it in mid-September going into November. Now, anyone that knows England knows that at the best of times, the weather is bloody terrible there for much of the year. The middle of summer, you can have your T-shirt on in the morning and need your, thick jacket by midday. It is just completely tempestuous. It's one of the reasons why this film exists, because no one can tell what's going on with the bloody weather there. And so I was pretty adamant that we needed to be filming this film in June, July latest, so that if we got this bad weather, then we had a fighting chance, because, if it was a washout, we still need to film our scenes, and, we're not going to get those in the middle of an English winter. The odds are that you're going to get them at some point in the summer. But just circumstances, availability of actors and different people meant that we started filming in fall going into winter. And I'll be honest with you, there were many points early on where I was like, this is insane. What do we do if we get up and it just rains and it just doesn't stop raining, which it does in England? You haven't got a lot of time to shoot a film. If the 1 or 2 weeks that you want to shoot your outdoor scenes, they're raining, you're out of luck, because it's a huge infrastructure to move around. And so I started exploring all of these different CGI things, and what could we do with computers if it was cloudy to make it look sunny, and vice versa. And then I kind of threw all that out the window, because we wanted it to be authentic. I didn't want it to be a CGI thing. Wanted to shoot it on location with real actors, with real props, with real people, all of that stuff. And as luck would have it, we were so close to just annihilation. But no, we had the most unbelievable good luck that I think anyone who's ever worked in the film industry in England would not believe. Not only to the day, but to the hour. We needed sun. The sun came out. One morning we're filming Eisenhower at the back of the compound looking at his troops. We needed it cloudy. That morning it was cloudy. We had to go around the front for a chapel scene where we needed some sun. During lunchtime, the sun came out. But this happened over and over again until the scenes where we had to film the Normandy landings, which, again, following Saving Private Ryan, following the masterwork that Spielberg did in that film, already, it's an issue. We had to sort of try and find ways to make it our own. We used archival footage and other things to try and do that, but we had to film this stuff. And art imitating life, imitating art, and I don't know which one starts where, but on the Wednesday, we were meant to shoot on Monday to Friday in our location for Normandy. We had 5 days to shoot it, 4 days with a 1 day backup. And on the Wednesday, we held this big meeting, and we had actually 3 different teams of meteorologists there. We had a marine biologist who, him and his team had spent the last 6 weeks on the sand dunes, one of them on the sand dunes with this laser pointer thing, another guy down in the water with these overalls, free cold water, in his overalls up to here with a stick, measuring hour by hour for 6 weeks how high and low the tide was, so that we could organize getting these flat bottom boats on and all our props and all our stuff. Tidal Beach moved 600 meters in one tide thing, meant that you couldn't just plan everything out for weeks or days in advance. We had to prep everything in the sand dunes and then move it in really quickly. But on the Wednesday, before the Monday, we got word that there would be, it was almost identical to the movie, what happens in the movie. There's going to be 50 knot winds, and, you know, I'm not really good on knots, but really hard, really fast, hard winds, 6 foot waves. You're barely going to be able to be on the beach. Like, it was just a freaking nightmare. And I remember sitting around that table being like, this is just hilarious. This is exactly like the film. What are we going to do? And I said, well, let's call it off. Like, there's no sense in like wasting a week going out to this new location and just getting, you know, crapped on by the weather for a week. We might as well just stay inside. Of course, the small problem is we wouldn't have had a climax for our film at that point. But if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. And as we got close to the date, there were differing opinions among our meteorological team. This is with satellites, with computers, with everything. Anyway, come the Monday, just like in the film, this massive storm hit our set, so we couldn't film on the Monday. All of the production design gear all got washed away, and they couldn't do anything. And then they saw an opening. And just like, and you can go and look, you know, if you want, speak to our producers, they'll tell you the dates. Go and look at what Canberra Sands, England Rye was doing in the days that we filmed. On the Monday, there was a storm. On the Monday night, I think we're going to get a window. Let's go for tomorrow, the Tuesday. Again, these are the same dates that happen in the days that happen in the movie. Come Tuesday, sun came out. We landed our men. We got beautiful filming for the next 3 days. But then we did need some cloudy scenes. And on the Thursday or Friday, the clouds came, the rain came, and we literally got everything we needed. So it was kind of astounding, to be honest with you.
What a microcosm. I mean,
right?
it's like you're in the Eisenhower role. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
and the haircut too.
Yeah, exactly. The same haircut, which I have to do. And can totally
looks good on you.
Oh, you too. I mean, it's what the best looking guys have. We know that.
Naturally. We don't need adornment, you know. It's all good.
Right. But I mean, you had to be thinking about that while all this is going on. You're dealing with your meteorologists, and you've got differing opinions, and I mean, that's kind of mind blowing, actually.
It actually, to be honest, it's funny, but it just put into focus how extraordinary what they did was back then. We got 1 million satellites. We've got algorithms computing every bit of data and all. They had nothing. It was like they had weather balloons, and they had people manually recording things, and it was just all up here. And I can't. It was so stressful making the film. Trying to imagine you've got the Western civilization on the line. Come on, it's something. It's hard. I hope the film conveys that. It's hard in the marketing or in talking about it to convey that. I hope the film does, but it's like people got to see the film for that reason, to look what leadership looks like. What do you do when you're under pressure? It's it was tough, and we were just making a movie, so you know.
I know, much less the real thing. Yeah, and different levels of leadership. Obviously, Eisenhower is the ultimate person responsible, but Stagg, as the leader of an entire meteorological section, having to speak on their behalf.
Well, Stagg and all of them, you know, Monty and Lee Mallory and Ramsey, all these guys, they were they were all really smart and they were all really exceptional at what they did. I'm sure historians could point to problems that all of them had in one way or another. But it was this, imagine trying to organize a logistics chain of 1 million men before computers, before spreadsheets, before emails, where it's all handwritten. It's got to be in secret, all of this sort of stuff. How do you do that? There's some really exceptional stuff going on there. And it's, it's films like, weirdly, it wasn't just war films. Yes, there's Imitation Game and Darkest Hour and films like that, but even something, I don't know, like Moneyball, is an interesting thing to look at where, okay, that's about baseball statistics, but it's kind of like there's more going on than just the military stuff as well in this, which is kind of interesting. So, yeah.
And even, I'm sorry, John. I was just going to say, and even the tension that you show created, between the generals, you've got Monty who really wants to go and is applying that pressure, but then you've got Lee Mallory who's very nervous about that given his given the paratroopers and everything. So it's just it was nice to show that also going on.
And Ramsey has to be kind of the adult in the room too,
right.
naval commander, so he has to tell them what is possible and what isn't.
Yeah, how do you tell a room full of people what they really don't want to hear when so much is riding on it? Yeah, absolutely. It's daunting.
So did you shoot some of these scenes in Southwark House, or like how did that work?
We had the opportunity to, and my first impulse was yes, absolutely, let's do that. However, since Southwark House, was built, well, not built, since Southwark House was used in World War II, it's still an active military base. And so that's basically meant that all surrounding that building, or the whole area surrounding that building used to be fields and grass and trees and stuff. They did have, another complex of buildings, which some have been knocked down, some aren't there, but they've since built buildings in the 50s and the 60s and the 80s and the 90s, all surrounding Southwark House. And so we couldn't use the exterior at all because any direction you pointed the camera, you're seeing stuff that is not real for World War II. And within Southwark House, it's like a museum now. And they were willing for us to go in and to film there, but you couldn't touch anything, you couldn't move anything. It was, you obviously had to respect the history that was there. And for a film crew, of this scale of what we were looking to do, it was more a matter of sending our production design team there, sending our people there, and trying to replicate things as best we could. Like, so for instance, the D-Day map that you see on the wall in our film, that is a to the inch replica of the real D-Day map on the wall that they used in Southwark House, even to the point where they had discolored, mismatching paint and wood panels, because when they made that map in World War II, they didn't want any one map maker, or in this case, they got toy makers to make the little boats and stuff. They didn't want any one company to have all the D-Day plans, so they sort of commissioned it out to all these different groups, and they put it together. And because of that, the panels are slightly different colors. So they even got that sort of level of detail in our film, and actually giving the map that we used in our film to a museum now at the end of our shoot. So yeah, but Southwark House is, I don't know if you've ever been there. It's quite a beautiful building, and obviously steeped in history. On the 75th anniversary of D-Day, they had a big commemoration there, and the presidents and prime ministers and leaders of all the Allied nations, as well as Germany, went there for a big ceremony. Actually played some scenes from the play Pressure to all the world leaders at the time, and that was a real centerpiece there. So if your audience care, they can look up and see that it's quite something. So yeah.
Let's circle back a little bit to Montgomery, because he's a character we like to talk about on this podcast quite a bit. And he's portrayed, of course, by Damian Lewis. A lot of our listeners will know him from Band of Brothers, of course. How hard is it to play a character like Montgomery? He's certainly a challenging personality, I would guess.
He was. I'm going to completely garble the quote, but Churchill said something funny about him, like, you know, this is not the exact right quote, but it was something like, in war, indispensable, in victory, unbearable, is the effect of what he said about Montgomery. And, well, he was a bulldog. He was not going to let go of his bone. And, you know, he cared deeply about his men. He cared deeply about what he did. He was a brilliant man and a war hero in his own right, but he just drove everyone bloody mad. And you know, you can't beat that as a dramatist, to have a character like that, because it's just such a juicy role. He's pushing Ike up the wall. Ike's probably smoking a packet of cigarettes and a half just because of Monty alone. But hey, great rivals, you know, a team of rivals, and you know, Damian was very conscious of trying not to portray the caricature of just the gruff kind of general, but someone, you know, he made sense in what he was saying. You know, it's just, it was at odds to what others were saying, and he wasn't going to back down. And he had various quirks that kind of riled people the wrong way, which again, is great for a movie. So that was kind of some of the thinking behind him.
Yeah, and we have a bust of Montgomery about 10 yards from Eisenhower's.
That's right.
So he's represented, but he gets a lot of commentary, probably more than anyone else in that garden.
I would say so.
On tours.
He does, because we think we know him. There's the caricature of him, especially from the movie Patton. You know,
yeah,
and the Americans certainly fixate on that, but there's a lot more complexity to him, and it's true that he was the one in favor of going, you know, among the major commanders, because he was looking at it as a land commander, like you have him saying, just get me ashore, and then we'll kind of do our thing. But he's really overlooking a lot of other elements to this, and obviously there's that point of tension between Ike and Monty, which goes back now, by that point, 2+ years. You know, ironically, it begins around a smoking incident when Monty was giving a briefing. Eisenhower lit up a cigarette. This is in 1942, and Monty stops the briefing and says, "Who is smoking?" and totally humiliates Eisenhower. So, I mean, they had a lot of set twos between then and 1944, but they also had a bit of a bond in a way, in a weird way, you know, because they'd been through a lot together. So how does Damian Lewis, a guy who's dealt with a lot of different roles and certainly is very conversant with World War II, you know, from Band of Brothers, you know, like from your standpoint as a director, how does he approach this role? How did you prepare him for it too?
Well, look, the beautiful thing about Damian is he is a real student of history. He's as English as they come, and you know, he grew up hearing stories of these figures since he was a young kid. And obviously the work that he's done before our film means that he's very keenly aware of World War II and everything that went on in it. But he kind of came to me and said, yeah, look, Montgomery, as you've written him, is great. I need more lines. So we wrote some more lines for him. But I think that more than anything, there's a kind of absurdity to Monty, you know, as well. Like, he was a real showman. He wouldn't be seen without his beret in public in many cases, and his jackets and all this sort of stuff. You know, there's the famous shots of him drinking the tea with his men in the, you know, in the tank fields, like stopping to have a cup of tea, as a quintessential Englishman. And you know, I think Damian was just very interested in going beyond the caricature and portraying a relentless general who wasn't going to stop. And he kept talking about he actually brought up something funny. He brought up a completely different movie that you would never, ever think of. But he brought up Don Logan, the Ben Kingsley character from Sexy Beast, if you've ever seen that, when he sits there and he sits opposite the gangster and he's trying to get him to do the bank robbery job or whatever. He's like, no, you're going to go. You're going to go. You're going to go. And Damian said, you know, he kind of reminds me of that. Like, it's not a bank heist, but we're going to go. We're going to crack that channel. We're going to go, you know. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. You got these two very intimidating figures, you know, one from Hades, from the underworld, and one from the aristocracy. But in some ways, they're not too different in that they're going to get their way. And I thought that was a kind of interesting take on it. Now, of course, Damian came and made it his own. But I think audiences, I've seen on the YouTube comments, are very excited to see Major Winters from Band of Brothers now getting a promotion to Montgomery. And yeah, he's fascinating. Like he's such an amazing actor, Damian, that there's a scene in the film where he's got to give an address where he's basically telling all the other commanders in chief the deception plans and the inflatable tanks and planes and stuff that they had to fool the Germans. And so obviously we had to have this footage playing. So we got an archival editing team together to put together all these shots of the said inflatable tanks and the midget submarines, all this sort of stuff. We'd cut this together in a reel that went for a few minutes. But obviously we had to time it to what Damian was saying in his speech. So I had organized this elaborate way of sort of, using the computer to hear what Damian was saying. When he went to a certain point, I'd press a button so that it would all be in sync. Damian just looked at me and goes, "Get rid of all that. Show me the video." I'm like, "But mate, you've got to do it to the second." He goes, "Show me the video twice." Went for 2 minutes. Looks at it once. He goes, "All right, show it to me again." Yep. Looks at it a second time. Goes, "Right, I'm ready." We get on set. We play it. He would have delivered this thing 12 times, 15 times over the different angles. And it was bang on every time, timed to the images that were being projected behind him, which, unless you're an actor, you might not realize how hard that is, but go and try and do it. He is a really, really clever man and a brilliant actor. So that's a bit about Damian Lewis.
Well, you have extraordinary talent throughout the entire film. So, and you've been so gracious with your time, Anthony. We've got one more question for you. What do you hope American audiences will take away from this movie?
I think more than anything, I hope they look at this film and get a sense of what great leadership looks like. And I think that's an important lesson to learn in these times where, things are pretty tough. And, Eisenhower's a pretty exceptional man in many ways. So and Stagg too, of course. So yeah, how to make a good decision. Go watch this movie. It's they had to make a pretty big one back then.
Yeah, it is a leadership movie. It's a point of tension movie. It's an interpersonal relationship movie, and nature as antagonist movie. It's got all that in it. So Anthony Amaris, it's been a real pleasure to have you on today. Thanks so much for your time and expertise. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Again, the movie is called Pressure, and the film opens in North America on May 29th. So if you're as D-Day obsessed as we are, go check it out.
And even if you're not, because it's just, like you said, so many lessons in this film. Great.
Yeah. Pertains to way more than D-Day, actually.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, thanks all. You can email our team at podcast@dday.org. Again, that's podcast@dday.org. If you're enjoying our discussions on World War II and its lasting impact, please subscribe to this podcast, share it with other friends, rate it, and leave us a review. Help us share the lessons and legacies of D-Day and World War II. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Take care.
Someone Talked is a production of the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, recorded at Media Squatch in Bedford, Virginia. The views expressed are not necessarily those of the foundation, studio, or sponsors. Promotional consideration for Someone Talked is provided by Framatome, an international leader in nuclear energy. Learn more at framatome.com. Explore the National D-Day Memorial, plan your visit, and learn more about our educational programming and upcoming events at dday.org. Join the conversation. Email our team at podcast@dday.org. So long from all of us at Someone Talked.